Somewhere today, a man will walk into a jewelry store and spend weeks or even months of salary on a diamond engagement ring. He may feel nervous about choosing the right size. He may worry that spending too little will make him look cheap. He may believe sincerely that the stone on that ring says something important about the seriousness of his love. What he probably will not think about is how recently that expectation was created. Before the late 1930s, diamond engagement rings were not a universal American tradition. They existed, certainly, but they were far from inevitable. Colored gemstones, simple gold bands, and other forms of jewelry were common. Diamonds were expensive luxuries associated mainly with wealthy families. What changed was not geology, it was marketing. And before marketing could transform diamonds into symbols of eternal love, another transformation had to happen first. Someone had to control the stones themselves. That story begins in southern Africa. In 1867, a 15-year-old boy named Erasmus Jacobs was walking near the Orange River in what is now South Africa's northern Cape when he picked up a strange pebble. It was translucent, heavy for its size, and reflected light differently from the ordinary stones around it. Jacobs brought it home and thought little of it. A neighbor, Schalk van Niekerk, noticed the stone and became curious. It eventually reached Dr. William Atherstone, a geologist in Grahamstown, who examined it and identified it as a diamond weighing 21.25 carats. The stone became known as the Eureka diamond. It attracted attention, but it did not yet create a rush. That came 2 years later. In 1869, a shepherd discovered an enormous stone near the same river. The diamond weighed more than 80 carats and became known as the Star of South Africa. It was eventually sold for an extraordinary sum. Suddenly, prospectors understood that the first discovery had not been an accident. Diamonds were buried in southern Africa. Men began arriving from across the world. Farmers abandoned fields. Merchants left businesses. Prospectors traveled from Europe and Australia, driven by the same dream that had drawn thousands toward California during the gold rush. Then, in 1871, prospectors discovered rich deposits farther inland on land associated with two brothers named De Beer. A mining settlement exploded almost overnight. Within months, tens of thousands of people were digging around what became the town of Kimberley. At first, every miner worked his own small claim. The landscape became a chaotic grid of individual pits separated by narrow walls of earth. As diggers descended, those walls collapsed. Water flooded claims. Equipment failed. Accidents multiplied. What emerged was the Big Hole, one of the most famous excavations in mining history. For decades, workers cut deeper into the earth using picks, shovels, ropes, and increasingly elaborate machinery. Millions of tons of rock were removed. The human cost was severe. Miners faced collapsing walls, disease, dehydration, and dangerous working conditions with almost no meaningful safety regulation. But the supply of diamonds seemed enormous, and that created a problem. If every miner extracted stones independently and sold them whenever he wanted, the market could be flooded. The more diamonds entered circulation, the harder it would be to maintain high prices. One young Englishman understood this better than almost anyone. His name was Cecil John Rhodes. Rhodes had arrived in South Africa as a teenager. Born in England in 1853, he had suffered from poor health, and his family hoped the warmer climate would help him. He initially joined his brother in farming, but the diamond fields offered something far more interesting. Rhodes arrived near Kimberley in the early 1876 and quickly recognized that the real opportunity was not simply finding diamonds, it was consolidation. Thousands of individual claims were inefficient. Owners competed against one another, damaged neighboring workings, and struggled with flooding and collapsing ground. Rhodes realized that if one organization controlled enough claims, it could mine more efficiently. More importantly, it could control production. He began buying abandoned or flooded claims, sometimes pumping them dry and selling them at a profit. Earnings were reinvested into additional property. Piece by piece, his influence expanded. In 1880, Rhodes formed the De Beers Mining Company, taking its name from the farm on which the deposits had been discovered. But he was not alone. His most formidable rival was Barney Barnado. Barnado had come from London's East End and once worked in entertainment. He arrived in South Africa with little capital but extraordinary energy and talent for negotiation. Like Rhodes, he accumulated mining claims and built a powerful company. The two men gradually swallowed smaller competitors until the diamond fields were dominated by their competing interests. The contest eventually became a battle for total control. Rhodes possessed a critical advantage: access to powerful financiers. Alfred Bates supplied capital and expertise. The London banking house N.M. Rothschild and Sons helped finance Rhodes's acquisition strategy. With this backing, he moved aggressively. He purchased major outside interests and concentrated his attention on Barnado's Kimberley Central Diamond Mining Company. Share prices rose as both sides fought for control. Eventually, Barnado agreed to a merger. In March 1888, De Beers Consolidated Mines was created with Cecil Rhodes as chairman. The consolidation involved one of the largest financial transactions of its era. Within a few years, De Beers controlled an overwhelming share of global diamond production. Rhodes had turned a chaotic collection of diggers into an international monopoly, but his most important achievement was not simply controlling mines. It was controlling scarcity. Rhodes understood that diamonds were valuable only if enough of them were kept away from consumers. The deposits in southern Africa were producing far more stones than the mythology of rarity would suggest. If all of those diamonds were sold freely, competition could drive prices downward. So De Beers restricted supply. The company worked with a tightly managed network of buyers and distributors that controlled how many rough diamonds reached the market. Supply could be reduced when prices weakened. More stones could be released when demand improved. The market was being managed deliberately. Diamonds appeared scarce because the company controlling them made sure they appeared scarce. For a time, the system worked remarkably well. Then Rhodes died in 1902. He was only 48. Without him, De Beers faced new threats. Additional diamond deposits were discovered in South Africa and in what is now Namibia. These mines were outside the company's direct control. New production began entering the market. By the beginning of World War I, De Beers' share of world output had fallen dramatically from its earlier dominance. The monopoly was weakening, then another man rebuilt it. Ernest Oppenheimer was born in Germany in 1880 and arrived in South Africa in 1902 as a representative of a London diamond firm. He learned the trade from the inside. He understood producers, buyers, pricing, distribution, and the importance of controlling access to the market in 1917. Backed partly by American financial interests, including J.P. Morgan, Oppenheimer created the Anglo-American Corporation. The company initially concentrated heavily on gold, but Oppenheimer wanted diamonds. Throughout the 1920s, he expanded his influence over diamond-producing regions and built competing distribution arrangements. In 1926, he gained a seat on the De Beers board. By 1929, he had become chairman. Oppenheimer took the supply control system pioneered by Rhodes and made it far more comprehensive. The central instrument became the central selling organization, rather than allow producers and dealers to negotiate independently in an open marketplace. Enormous quantities of rough diamonds were directed through one controlled distribution channel. Selected buyers, known as sightholders, were invited to purchase boxes of stones at prices established by the organization. There was little negotiation. Buyers accepted the parcel and the price, or risked losing access to future supply. That gave De Beers extraordinary leverage. A dealer who challenged the system could be excluded. A producer who attempted to operate independently faced an even more dangerous response. If an outside mine began selling a particular type of diamond aggressively, De Beers could release similar stones from its own reserves, increasing supply and pushing prices downward. The independent producer would watch profits collapse. Once weakened, it could be pressured into cooperating with the system or potentially absorbed. By the 1930s, De Beers had re-established control over most of the international diamond trade. It had achieved something astonishing. One organization could influence how many stones entered the market, which dealers received them, and what price the industry expected buyers to accept. But then the Great Depression exposed a weakness even monopoly could not solve. Demand collapsed. De Beers could restrict supply as much as it wanted, but there was a deeper problem. Ordinary people did not desperately want diamonds. During the Depression, families had far more practical concerns. Furniture, automobiles, household appliances, rent, and savings mattered more than an expensive clear gemstone. Engagement rings existed, but diamonds were hardly mandatory. Only a small minority of American brides received one. De Beers therefore faced a problem more difficult than mining diamonds or controlling distribution. It had mastered scarcity. Now it needed to manufacture desire. In 1938, the company approached the Philadelphia advertising agency, N.W. Ayer & Son, with an extraordinary challenge. Do not simply advertise a stone. Change what the stone means. Turn a luxury that most people considered unnecessary into something no proposal would feel complete without. De Beers had spent half a century learning how to control the world's supply of diamonds. Now it was about to learn how to control the story people told themselves about why they needed one. In 1938, De Beers faced a problem that control of the mines could not solve. It had spent decades restricting supply, organizing distribution, and protecting prices. But none of that mattered if ordinary people did not care enough about diamonds to buy them. So De Beers approached the Philadelphia advertising agency, N.W. Ayer & Son, with a request that was unusually direct. The company wanted help using what its own correspondents described as propaganda to increase diamond sales in the United States. The assignment was unlike a normal advertising campaign. De Beers did not sell finished rings directly to consumers. It sold rough diamonds. There was no single branded product to put in a magazine advertisement. There was also little meaningful competition to attack. De Beers already controlled most of the supply, and the product itself had almost no practical function. A diamond did not make a household more comfortable. It did not transport anyone to work. It did not cook food, wash clothes, or produce income. It was a small crystal whose value depended almost entirely on what people believed it represented. N.W. Ayer therefore made a crucial decision. Do not sell the diamond, sell the meaning. The agency would connect diamonds so closely with romantic commitment that eventually consumers would stop thinking of the two ideas separately. A diamond would become proof of love. The campaign began subtly. Instead of relying only on obvious advertisements, the agency worked to make diamonds appear naturally throughout American culture. Newspapers and magazines received stories about celebrity engagements. Fashion editors were encouraged to feature diamond jewelry. Hollywood actresses appeared wearing diamonds at premieres and public events. Movie studios were encouraged to place diamond rings in romantic scenes. On screen, the proposal increasingly came with a sparkling stone. The strategy worked because it did not feel like advertising. It felt like society itself was changing. Young women saw actresses receiving diamonds. They saw socialites wearing them. They read stories implying that sophisticated, desirable women expected them. Soon the diamond engagement ring began to look less like a luxury product and more like a tradition everyone else already understood. The campaign even reached into schools. Lecturers were sent to speak with young women about engagement customs and the symbolic meaning of diamonds, introducing the idea before many of them were old enough to marry. De Beers was not waiting for consumers to enter jewelry stores. It was shaping their expectations years in advance. The results came quickly. Between 1938 and 1941, diamond sales in the United States rose sharply. But the campaign still lacked a phrase capable of condensing the entire strategy into a few words. That arrived in 1947. A copywriter at N.W. Ayer named Frances Garrity was working late on the De Beers account when she wrote 4 words, "A diamond is forever." She reportedly did not consider the line extraordinary. Neither did everyone around her, but the agency used it, and the phrase became one of the most influential advertising slogans of the 20th century. On the surface, its meaning was romantic. Love is eternal. Marriage is supposed to last forever. A diamond, with its hardness and durability, becomes the physical symbol of that promise. But commercially, the slogan did something even more valuable. It discouraged resale. If a diamond represents eternal love, selling it feels emotionally wrong. You do not sell your wedding memories. You do not trade in the symbol of a marriage. You keep the stone. That behavior protected the diamond industry from one of its greatest threats, a large secondhand market. Consumers who tried to resell diamonds often discovered that the price they had paid in a jewelry store bore little relationship to what another buyer would offer them. Retail diamonds could lose enormous amounts of value immediately after purchase. If millions of owners regularly attempted to resell their stones, consumers might begin to recognize that diamonds were not necessarily the reliable stores of value they had been led to imagine. A diamond is forever helped prevent that. The diamond remained in a jewelry box on a finger or inside a family collection. It did not return to the marketplace. That allowed De Beers to keep selling new diamonds to each new generation. The company and its advertising partners then pushed the strategy further. They needed to answer another important question. How much should a man spend? The solution was brilliant because it avoided naming a specific price. A man should spend a portion of his salary. Early campaigns encouraged the idea of spending roughly 1 month's income on an engagement ring. The formula worked across social classes. A factory worker and a banker might purchase very different rings, but both could be told that the seriousness of their commitment should be measured against their earnings. The purchase became moralized. Spend too little, and perhaps you did not love her enough. Perhaps you were not financially successful enough. Perhaps you were not ready for marriage. By the 1980s, the expectation had expanded. 1 month's salary became 2. Advertisements connected the size and cost of the diamond not simply to romance, but to the future a man could provide. The ring became a public signal. It communicated commitment, financial capability, status, and masculine success. That social pressure was extraordinarily powerful because the product was tied to one of the most emotionally vulnerable moments in adult life. Most men did not want a proposal to fail over money. Most women did not want to feel that their engagement was somehow inferior to those of friends. Once enough people accepted the expectation, the advertising no longer needed to do all the work. Society began enforcing the rule itself. Friends compared rings. Families developed expectations. Popular culture repeated the ritual. What had begun inside an advertising strategy became social custom. The numbers reflected that transformation. When De Beers began working with N.W. Ayer, American wholesale diamond sales were measured in the tens of millions of dollars. Several decades later, they were measured in billions. In the early years of the campaign, only a small minority of first-time American brides received diamond engagement rings. By the end of the 20th century, the proportion had risen dramatically. Within roughly one generation, De Beers had transformed an optional luxury into what many Americans viewed as an essential step toward marriage. Then the company demonstrated that the same technique could work in cultures where no diamond tradition existed at all. Japan provided the most remarkable example. Traditional Japanese marriage customs had no historical role for diamond engagement rings. For much of the 20th century, Western-style romantic engagement itself existed uneasily beside older family-centered marriage traditions. Diamonds were not merely uncommon, they were culturally foreign. Yet after import restrictions eased, De Beers entered the Japanese market with advertising designed around a different emotional appeal. In America, the diamond represented romantic tradition. In Japan, it could represent Western modernity. Advertisements associated diamond rings with cosmopolitan lifestyles, personal choice, fashionable marriage, and participation in a modern global culture. The strategy worked with extraordinary speed. In the late 1960s, only a very small percentage of Japanese brides received diamond engagement rings. Within little more than a decade, the proportion had risen to a majority. Japan became one of the world's largest diamond markets. A custom with essentially no deep roots in Japanese history had been installed within one generation. That may be the clearest demonstration of what De Beers had actually created. It was not simply selling gemstones, it was manufacturing social expectations. The system operated as a closed loop. Control supply so diamonds appear scarce. Control distribution so prices remain stable. Advertise relentlessly so emotional demand continues growing. Discourage resale so secondhand stones do not undermine new sales. Then use the profits to strengthen every part of the system. For decades, it worked, but the monopoly eventually began to weaken. New deposits were discovered in places De Beers could not easily dominate. Major producers emerged in Russia, Australia, and Canada. These were not small miners who could be pressured into submission. Some were backed by governments or large multinational companies capable of selling independently. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russian diamonds increasingly reached the market outside De Beers' traditional distribution network. Australia's Argyle mine added enormous quantities of stones, particularly smaller diamonds. The supply system Rhodes and Oppenheimer had built was becoming harder to control. At the same time, another problem damaged the romantic image of the industry. Conflict diamonds during brutal wars in parts of Africa, diamonds were mined and sold to finance armed groups. Images of mutilated civilians, child soldiers, and exploited miners became connected with the same stones that advertising had spent decades presenting as symbols of purity and love. Even when De Beers itself was not directly responsible for the worst abuses, public scrutiny of the industry increased. Consumers began asking where diamonds came from. Regulators began asking how prices were controlled. American antitrust authorities had long viewed De Beers' market power with suspicion. In the 2000s, the company entered legal settlements involving accusations of price fixing and monopolistic conduct, paying substantial fines and settlements. The old centralized diamond empire was losing power. Then science introduced a threat that marketing could not easily intimidate or buy. Lab-grown diamonds. Synthetic diamonds are not imitation stones like cubic zirconia. They are diamonds. They have essentially the same carbon crystal structure and the same physical and optical properties as diamonds mined from the earth. The difference is origin. One forms deep underground over geological time. The other is produced using technology. As manufacturing improved, gem-quality lab-grown diamonds became cheaper and increasingly available. Consumers suddenly faced an uncomfortable question. If two stones look the same, test the same, and sparkle the same, why should one cost dramatically more simply because it came out of the ground? For De Beers, this struck directly at the mythology of scarcity. A lab could produce what nature supposedly made precious through rarity. Prices began falling, younger consumers increasingly compared stones online, examined markups, and questioned the old salary rules. The information environment had changed completely from the world NWI dominated in 1938. The industry could no longer control the story as easily. Consumers could investigate resale values within seconds. They could compare dozens of retailers. They could read about De Beers' monopoly history, artificial supply restrictions, advertising campaigns, and the origins of engagement ring customs, and they could purchase a laboratory-grown alternative for significantly less money. Yet the most remarkable part of the story is that diamonds remain culturally powerful. People who know the tradition was manufactured still participate in it. Couples still choose diamond engagement rings. Families still expect them. Friends still admire them. Proposals and movies still end with them. That persistence reveals the true achievement of the De Beers campaign. Advertising stopped being advertising, it became ritual. De Beers did not merely convince people to purchase a gemstone. It inserted that gemstone into one of the most emotionally significant moments in human life. Love existed long before diamond engagement rings. Marriage existed long before De Beers. But after decades of carefully engineered scarcity, celebrity placement, social pressure, and emotional storytelling, millions of people began treating the diamond as though it had always belonged there. The stone is real. The feelings attached to it can be completely real. But the supposed ancient tradition connecting the two is something else entirely. It was constructed, and few marketing campaigns in history have ever constructed anything so successfully.